Great, so we're going to get started. Thanks to everyone who was able to be here with us tonight. We're excited to have some great information about having good conversations with kids. We're excited that ParentIN was able to partner again with Dr. David Rettew and offer this opportunity for families or parents or those working with youth in the community, thinking about how to have good conversations with kids. So I just wanted to start us off by sharing that this is an event hosted by ParentIN Burlington and ParentIN CVSD. So that's ParentIN is a program for primarily targeted for parents of middle school and parents and caregivers of middle schoolers to help them learn skills, get access to resources, get connected with each other to help support your kids to live substance-free lives while their brains are still developing. But we know that a lot of the information is really helpful when your kids are even younger than middle school or high school. So please feel free to connect with us regardless of the age of your kids. But we do sometimes target some of that information to families with middle schoolers too, to help prepare them for what their kids might be exposed to in high school. So we'll talk more at the end about how to get connected to ParentIN. I know some people who registered weren't from the CVSD or Burlington school districts, and that's fine. The information is relevant for wherever you're coming to us from. So we're happy to have you. But if you do live in the Burlington school district or your kids go to the Champlain Valley School District, there's additional resources and support within those school districts too. So we are excited to have Dr. David Rettew with us today. I've had the pleasure of working with and interviewing Dr. Rettew around a variety of issues on a number of topics related to parenting and for folks who work with kids. I have 2 teenagers of my own, so I'm very appreciative of the wonderful mix of kind of knowledge and compassion that he brings to issues that so many of us are dealing with or working through with our children. And I wanted to share that Dr. Rettew is a child and adolescent psychiatrist and the Associate Professor of Psychiatry and Pediatrics at the University of Vermont, Lerner College of Medicine. He has a new book, which is called Parenting Made Complicated: What Science Really Knows About the Greatest Debates of Early Childhood. We'll be raffling off some of those books to everyone who is able to be here today, and we can mail those out to anyone who left mailing addresses for us when you registered. Dr. Rettew is also the medical director of the Child Division of the Vermont Department of Mental Health, and he has over 100 published journal articles, chapters, and scientific abstracts on a variety of child mental health topics. He also has a great blog that I've checked out on Psychology Today called The ABCs of Child Psychiatry, and that's been viewed over 1.2 million times at this point. So exciting. And you can find him on Twitter and Facebook at PD Psych. And he also, this is a relevant issue for him as well. He's married and the father of 3 boys of his own here in Vermont. So we have a lot of things to talk about today and connections that Dr. Rettew can make. And I'm really excited to pass it on to him now. Thank you for joining us today.
All right, thank you. So good evening, everybody. Just want to start by thanking Mariah and ParentIN for inviting me and having me come tonight. And I really want to thank all of you for attending. I know that this is prime time for parents. It's a school night. So I'm going to work hard to make your time feel like it's worthwhile as best as I can, and try to put things in here that are not, just sort of common sense, although I'm sure many of you will know many of the things that we're going to cover today. And so let's get started. Let me just start with my disclosures. So those are the 2 books that I wrote. I will be talking a little bit, I won't be talking much from the book. I will talk a little bit about 1 chapter related to praise, because that is an important part of conversations with kids. But other than that, we'll be talking about other topics. I do like to mention that I don't get any money from any pharmaceutical industry or company. And I thought I also might say, while we're talking about disclosures, is I actually feel like when it comes to having great conversations with kids, that I'm actually not, naturally super good at it. And, when Mariah first asked me to do this, I thought, I don't feel like this is sort of my instinctual skill set. I've certainly learned a few things over in my training, in my experience, and being a father, of course. And I think I've certainly gotten better at it. But I guess what I'm trying to say, so at first I was wondering, am I the right person for this? And then I ended up sort of deciding that, sure, I might be, because, I'm just coming at this from a different place. So instead of kind of, I'm awesome at this, learn from my skills and my knowledge, it's more like, hey, I don't find this really super easy myself. And here are some strategies that have helped me develop meaningful conversations and good conversations with youth. And I hope some of these strategies will be useful to you. And, I just wanted to sort of say that in the beginning. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start talking about some sort of general principles about conversations, sort of general tips, also some specific topics that I hope you'll find useful, such as praise. We'll get into how things are a little bit different, maybe not that different when we're talking about older children and adolescents. And then we're going to get into, well, and what about those tough conversations that parents, need to have from time to time with their kids, and how can we make those, I'm not going to say easier, but but make them productive, make them meaningful. And so in between each of the sections, I'll stop, and happy to hear your questions and your comments. I was excited to see how many people had signed up for this, and I'm certainly well aware that there's a lot of expertise in this, Zoom call, well beyond myself. So interested in hearing other people's perspective as well. I'm also going to supplement this with a few different video clips, and we're going to start with one from Despicable Me. And hopefully you'll be able. So I hope you enjoyed that. I really like that movie, and I think it points out, both some things that can help facilitate conversations with younger kids and things that may get in the way. So just kind of wanted to first go through a few sort of general principles that I think can be helpful. One is as difficult as it may be sometimes, to really try to engage kids in talking about topics that are interesting to them. So you saw Gru struggled with that one. He wasn't interested in this book at all, and the kids plowed ahead anyway. But for other kids, I think they can get turned off, when they see that you're really not that interested in the topics that they want to talk about. And I think having that enthusiasm, even if sometimes you're working at it, to be enthusiastic can make a difference. Reducing distractions is also good. And I think this applies both for you and for the child. And especially if you're getting big questions about big conversations, that's a signal to maybe stop what you're doing and put down what you're doing, and really try to pay attention and listen to what your child is trying to talk to you about. And certainly there's principles about being an active listener that can be important. So active listener means, you're not looking at your phone, you're not kind of thinking about other things, you're making an effort to really focus on what your child is saying, making eye contact, making some nonverbal cues like nodding or other kinds of things to show that you value what they're saying and you want to have this conversation. Younger kids also, I think it's good to try, when appropriate, to try to include emotion and feeling words. A lot of kids don't necessarily have those in their repertoire, and it's sometimes good to supply that for them. It may feel like you're sort of putting words in their mouth, or more like feelings in their head is probably a better thing. And you can, say, well, this is what it feels, it seems like you're angry, afraid, and try it out. But I think it's good to try to help them start naming emotions. And then one thing that I'll bring up for both younger and older kids is to tell stories. Kids especially love to hear about your past. If they're not talking, it's certainly a good opportunity to talk about. If they don't want to tell you how it was school, you can tell them, age appropriately, of course, about how was your day. How was work for you? What kind of things are you thinking about? And that can sometimes set a precedent and get kids talking later. Another one is don't rush in. Try not to finish their thoughts or sentences. Sometimes kids take a while to form their thoughts and form their sentences, and it's good not to try to cut them off. And then especially when you're issuing commands or asking questions, I know I struggle with this one, but you got to try to keep them simple. Not ask 3 questions at the same time, or not make multiple requests at the same time, because that's sort of setting yourself up for them not either hearing what your question was or not following your directions. One issue I do like to bring up sometimes is, our kids who it looks like they're, having these profound overreactions to little tiny things. This comes up all the time. An example here might be, a little brother is playing a game with the mother and the older brother. The younger brother is doing okay from the start, but then the older brother catches up and wins. And despite the fact that this is a game that's full of luck, the younger brother gets really upset. Despite the fact that it looks like this is really over nothing. You say something like, "It's only a game." Well, why this huge reaction to such little things? And this comes up all the time with younger kids. And sometimes kids really do just, overreact, at least from our perspective. They really do make mountains out of molehills. But sometimes, and I think it's worth thinking about this, sometimes on the surface, it looks like what they're reacting to is something really small, but it's actually a big feeling that this small event is triggering. So for this particular example, it may be, for example, that this child struggles with the fact that he has an older brother who's very good at things, and he actually feels like he can't measure up, and maybe he'll never measure up. And so when he reacts to this game of luck not going his way, even though it looks like it's just over a game, it's actually over a big feeling and a big thought of maybe not being able to measure up to the brother. And so if you can look for those things and be able to respond and think about what maybe the big thing that's being triggered is, I think you can have a more productive conversation about what's going on and how to help them feel better. I also like to mention, one of the themes of my book is that there's kind of no one, right answer all the time for parenting, and that, the right way to parent kids depends on their temperament, depends on your temperament, it often depends on a lot of different things. And so, I think it's worth it to sometimes take measure of your own personality and your own temperament, and think about how that can contribute, in both good and maybe not so good ways to your style of conversation with kids. So for people who are more introverted, I would consider myself to be part of that category. How does that affect, your approach to talking with kids? So I think things that might help is just being able to recognize that this may take more deliberate effort. You're not necessarily a social butterfly, and that you have to, be a little bit more deliberate about it. You may have to look up conversation starters and things. And another tip that I've found that can be helpful is to use what I call launching questions, which is basically a way to get somebody else talking. So you get the ball rolling, but then, they're off. And so you can just use questions like, tell me about, rather than yes, no questions. That can be a way to help, get conversations going. For those of people who are the exact opposite, who are, more the sort of the chatterbox kind of person, I think the challenges are different. So here, the challenges may not be what to say, but being able to hold back and to listen, and being able not to rechannel something your child says back to yourself. And instead, I think it's generally a good idea when your child starts a conversation, not to return with, oh, and that reminds me of when I was, or, but to be able to sort of build on what they are saying, keep the focus on them as much as possible. And then for people who tend to maybe have an inclination to be more judgmental, can be prone to nagging, which is definitely a turnoff for a lot of kids in conversations. Just be aware that maybe some of your statements have some embedded criticism in them or commands about ways that you have to do things, and that perhaps that is slowing down a good flow of information. And for those of you looking for some practice, one thing that people call it different things. Sometimes it's called the child's game, but this is an idea where you basically spend a little bit of time each day, interacting, playing with your kid, but it's not sort of the typical play. It's basically very much child-led play. And I think it works best with more sort of imaginative play, make-believe kind of stuff. But your job is basically to be like a baseball announcer. So you're spending maybe 20 minutes, they're running the show, they're leading what happens, and you basically just say what you see. Oh, I see that you've picked this up, and you're involved, but you're not trying to steer, you're not trying to criticize, you're not trying to direct. And these can be nice opportunities to really understand some of your child's interests. And also sometimes you can pick up on themes that may be active in their mind. I want to spend a little bit about talking about praise, because I think this is another important part of conversation. So here's just sort of a quick question. A 6-year-old draws a picture and brings it to their parent. And you should say, "What a beautiful picture. You're a terrific artist. You're the best artist in your class. You really worked hard to get your drawing just right." So they all sound like things that people may have said. They all sound like praise, and they all kind of may sound like the same. But I want to actually talk about some research that suggests that, what the effects of praise are and how there can be different types of praise. Because this is certainly, this is an area that certainly is quite controversial. And people talk a lot about whether kids are being underpraised, whether kids are being overpraised. What's this about everyone getting a trophy? So that people are understandably sort of confused about this with everything that they see over on the internet. So let's talk a little bit about praise. Why do we praise? What's going on here? So the arguments for using praise is basically twofold. So one is praise is used as a reinforcement. So forget all the warm fuzzy stuff. We praise because we are noticing a behavior that we want to see more of. And praise as a reinforcement may get you more of that same behavior. So you say, "I love the way that you tied your shoes." Then maybe tomorrow he'll tie his shoes again. Maybe he'll even put on his own coat, and go even further. So that's sort of one reason. But then the other reason is certainly more of a self-esteem builder. So the idea that you're giving kids a sense of value and efficacy, which they need to help them succeed and build confidence. But praise has also been criticized because if you give too much of it, there's the feeling that it loses its value. Like any currency, if there's too much of it, it becomes worth less. And so nobody really cares, right? So, a trophy that you work really hard for gets stuck on a shelf. A trophy that every kid in the league gets maybe gets put in a drawer, so you can lose that. And then, people may be so motivated just from the praise that they lose the intrinsic value of things. And then there's the concern that too much praise can also build selfishness, feelings of entitlement, maybe even some narcissistic traits. And they sort of set up kids in a inauthentic way, as feeling great without having really earned the praise. And then when they actually can't succeed, then they kind of fall even harder. So what do we know about praise? And so I in general, I like to sort of refocus the debate, not as so much are kids getting too much or too little. I think, that's sort of an impossible question. I certainly think there are some kids who get too little and some that get too much. But one of the things the research is telling us that I think is really important and interesting is that there's different types of praise. There's a type of praise that's called person praise, which is directed at traits, right? So you are a fast runner. You're saying something about the way your child is, versus process praise, which is directed at something that something specific, a method that you do. So it turns out that this is important. This is an important distinction because research has suggested that process praise can contribute to something called a growth mindset, which is a belief that success and achievement comes from effort and practice. Whereas a fixed mindset is sort of the belief that your success comes from sort of factors that you're born with, that you're endowed with, and that you can reveal that you don't actually have them if you fail in front of other people. And the research tends to suggest that that process praise that's directed at methods and effort can lead to more of a growth mindset, can lead to an improvement of motivation, especially under challenging situations. Whereas a person praise may end up leading to people wanting to sort of protect, these compliments, and as a result, not try as hard under challenging situations. So, so it's an interesting distinction, and I think it's something that to be mindful of when you're doing this. And there's even further research that kids who tend to have lower self-esteem to begin with, and these are the kids that we would love to be able to just with our words sort of convey, that they're valued and that we care about them and they're important. So we may be, used to be doing even more sort of person praise, but unfortunately, the research tends to show that backfires, and that kids with self-esteem they tend to hear more person praise, but then that can often lead to increased feelings of shame after a failure. And so that the strategy may be better to really try to empower them with the skills that they can build authentic achievement and success, and then of course let them feel good about that success. Another important piece about praise is that in some ways, some of the controversy is a little bit misdirected. So we talk so much about the good things that we say about our kids, but it turns out that some of the negative things that can slip out and are not so great moments when we may say things that are harsh, that actually can kind of sabotage our effects at praise. So in some ways, while we want to be looking at what we do, what we say in terms of praise, I think what may be just as important, maybe even more important, is really trying to minimize those sharp, kind of nasty things that all of us can sometimes slip out in our not so great moments. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about some older kids and adolescents. So some of the things are, I think, similar. Some of the general recommendations, using open-ended questions, that don't invite, yes or no or one-word answers. How was your day? Good. That's it, right? Or so what happened today? Or what are the things that you remember most about your day? At least, get a little bit of a conversation going a little bit more. Again, I think sharing your own experiences is a nice way to invite further conversations. Not that you want to monopolize conversations, but that it may, at least open the door and it's sort of a modeling technique that kids can follow. For adolescents, I also think it's important not to shut down topics too quickly. So they're paying attention, and I think they can perceive pretty well when we feel uncomfortable about specific topics that we want to avoid. And to the degree that we can, it's good not to sort of convey too easily that these are things that it's certainly fine to agree to talk about things, say that they're difficult topics, acknowledge that, but not necessarily to shut them down. Older kids sometimes, I think, also can respond to just every once in a while an invitation to let them know that that you're interested in talking, that you can withstand talking about hard feelings and thoughts and emotions, what the parameters are for, there not being consequences to it, to feelings, thoughts, and emotions. And I think that, generally we shouldn't have consequences for for those things. It's more about behavior. Also can be good to really do things together, especially for older kids. It's hard to just sort of sit down across a table and have, one-to-one conversations. A lot of really good conversations come up in context. They come up when you're sharing an activity or on the way to that activity or on the way back. So these can be, so sharing activities not only gives you content of what you want to talk about, but I think it also provides a lot of nice opportunities for good conversations.
Dr. Rettew, I wanted to make sure you knew that you weren't sharing your screen at the moment.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
No worries. All good information.
Yeah, I'm just sort of reading off the slides, so let me get that back on again. So you didn't miss anything. I was just talking about this slide. And then another little trick that sometimes, I was also talking about text. So I'm sure some of you are awesome at text. Some of you maybe not. It is obviously a way that teens, it's a huge form of communication. And, I think to the degree that you're willing to use text as a medium, I think probably the better. And another technique that I found is to ask your teen to teach you something. They know a lot. Maybe they want it. Maybe they could teach you how to text faster. But having things where they're the ones who are the experts and they need to explain things to you, I think can be a nice venue for a lot of good back and forth conversation. And if you have kids who really don't want to engage, they really just seem to be very resistant. Some ideas that may help. One is to try to shift to topics that are a little less edgy, a little less hard to talk about. For some kids, they've decided that they, may want to avoid parents altogether or as much as they can because they feel like if they engage us as a parent that we're going to necessarily bring up these sensitive topics that they just don't want to talk about, the girlfriend or how they don't have a job or how they're not doing well at school. And so, in their minds, it's just easier not to engage at all. So I think sometimes you may have to kind of pull back and talk about things that they're more interested in talking about. It's good to just acknowledge what you see. I mean, it seems like a simple thing, but it's something that we often, forget to do. Just, say, look, I miss some of our conversations that we used to have. And I wonder if there's something that I'm doing that's shutting them down, or is anything that I can do to help you feel more comfortable talking with me. Just making that acknowledgement can sometimes help break the ice. Also acknowledging that there are topics, getting back to the fact that you can withstand and are interested in talking about more sensitive topics. You can sort of indicate that you're willing to bring them up by, say, commenting about something you saw on television or something you hear on the radio together, and that signals to your child, hey, okay, maybe, my parent actually can talk about substance use, or they, can talk about, sex and dating, and it's kind of another open door invitation. And then if you're really concerned, I think there are some cases where it's just too tough for teens and kids, and one way to move the needle at first is to consider having your adolescent talk to somebody else first, and that could be like a professional counselor, or it could be another family member or somebody else to kind of at least be an intermediary to help, maybe try to help understand, what's getting in the way of better communication. Another thing that I think that can be really important is, and I acknowledge that this is not possible for all families, but family meals can be a really critical time and a really important place to have conversation with your kids. And in some cases, it's not uncommon, especially for older kids. It sometimes may be sort of the only time in the day that the whole family is there, or most of the family is there, sort of face to face, talking with each other without being preoccupied by the things. So to the extent that you can, and I realize that people's work schedules and other things may sometimes get away. And I'm not talking about, the picture above necessarily having a Norman Rockwell dinner every time, but just, having a time where, the basic ground rules are, we sit around a table, we don't have the electronics on, we're engaging with each other, we're talking with each other. And that can be a really important time, and I think that's something to try to preserve as much as you can. This data point is from the Vermont Youth Risk Behavior Survey, and that they found that over time, about maybe 3/4 of teens are saying that they get to eat dinner at home with at least one of their parents 4 days a week. And it looks like you can see that number drops as kids get a little bit older, and it looks like it's also been dropping slightly with time. And here, this was one of my Psychology Today posts, for people who are just looking for things to say. And sometimes really it's like, what question can I ask that won't just get a shrug or a grunt? So this was a project that I actually did with my then 16-year-old son. And to be honest, one of the reasons why I did this was, to have something to have a place to talk to him about. And he ended up really getting into this and talking to his friends, and we all sort of ended up trying to contribute as many questions as possible. And so here's just sort of a list of different questions that you may want to consider asking your child as a way to get conversations going. There's a bunch out there. If you just Google conversation starters, you'll see a bunch of others. And, interestingly, I think I've written maybe about 110 posts on Psychology Today. And this one is by far the one that has been viewed the most, I think about 250,000 times. So certainly, I think we're all on this boat of, wondering, what can we say to get a conversation going? And these suggestions, sort of span the whole gamut between very kind of light and innocent questions, as well as more, heavier questions. And certainly they're not going to be appropriate for everybody, but at least it can give you an idea of some things that may be worth, talking about when you pick up your child, or when you're sitting at dinner, or when you're just sort of sitting around the house. And I put them all here, not because we're going to go through them right now, but be happy to share the slides, and you can also sort of find this on the blog too. Another point I want to sometimes make, and this is more when things are when your adolescent is struggling a little bit, is it's very easy for us to kind of go into fix-it mode, try to say, okay, what can we do to change the feeling? And that's not always what we need to do. That's not always what is interpreted as being supportive. Sometimes, even though it feels like we're not doing anything concretely, just being there, acknowledging the feelings is really doing more than we may think it is. So let me give you this is another clip. This is from another terrific movie called Little Miss Sunshine. And this is the one. So I think that's a beautiful scene, and illustrates that, the parents understandably are trying to say the right thing, downplay the hurts. But what he needed in that moment, which Olive did beautifully, is just to have somebody come up and, put her head on his shoulder. So really like that scene very much. All right, let's move to talking about some challenging topics. I want to be mindful of the time. So what I mean are, a lot of these things, you can probably come up with a lot more, but these talks, in quotes, the talks about sex and substances and racism, sexism, mental health problems, marital problems, politics, poor grades. What are some advice that can help with these difficult topics? I'm going to kind of skip this one, but so some general recommendations is I think a lot of us get into the mindset that these are sort of one-offs, that these are like these big single conversations that you have, and you sort of set the stage, and you walk up to your child and you say, okay, can I talk to you about something? And and all of a sudden what's this going to be about? And for these kinds of topics, I think rather than sort of framing it that way, I think it's much better to sort of bring up these topics incrementally, starting when they're really much younger, and not go through the entire thing, but to just, sort of broach the subject here and there at multiple time points. And this can be a lot easier strategy because when kids are young, they're more willing to talk to you. They're more willing to sort of ask questions and also sort of indicate, where their cognitive limitations are, when you've said enough, where they're not getting it. And you can really sort of, I think, pace it a little bit better. These are also conversations where it may be good to think a little bit more, prepare a little bit more about really what you want to say and how you're going to say it. But at the same time, you don't want to kind of rotely go through a speech. You do want to be paying attention to clues from your child about, what's the impact of what you're saying? Are you going too far? Are you not going far? Go far enough? And it's also, I think, also important to talk about how, to really sort of go out of your way to say that, this is a difficult conversation, and that you're here to try to be helpful. You're not here to get them in trouble. You're not here to sort of do a gotcha kind of moment, and that it's not going to be great, that you're going to probably stumble through it. This is not going to be one of these movie clips where you're just sort of shining through. And it's okay. You kind of acknowledge the awkwardness and say that this is kind of challenging for both of us, but we need to go ahead and do it anyway. Specifically for substance abuse, again, I think it's important to convey interest, ask questions in ways that convey interest rather than suspicion. Another good reason to start early. One way that I think it's easier to start asking questions about substance use is before you start asking questions about your kid, you can ask questions about the school. So, hey, is cannabis a problem? Do people use cannabis at your school? Are people getting pressured? So you're starting with questions about other people rather than about your child, specifically. But then at some point, I think it is good to be able to convey, what you know in terms of the risks, and there are a lot of resources to help you do that, and also state really explicitly about what your expectations are. So is your expectation that up until a certain age they don't experiment at all, or is it that you tolerate some, but then you want them to be able to draw the line some other place? It's good to be able to say that. And I think a lot of parents are also afraid of the question, well, what about you? Did you try? Have you? I see you drinking alcohol. Did you try marijuana? So think through about how you're going to answer that. And I think one way to do it is to be honest, but not to, but to acknowledge that, maybe that wasn't the right choice at the time. So say something like, yes, I did try drugs when I was in college, but goodness, I look back at some of the things I did, and I'm just really lucky that there wasn't a worse outcome in some of those situations. So you're being truthful without encouraging it. Using I statements, back to kindergarten. So rather than sort of more accusatory tones, you say, I worry when you don't come home after the time that you're supposed to. And I think those things can help feel less accusatory. And then also to, when people do want information, to refer to trusted sources. And as you all know, the internet is full of good information and bad information. When it comes to sex, again, I think this is another great example of bringing up the subject early in developmentally appropriate ways. So, for a younger child, it may be something as simple as, starting to use the right names for anatomy. No, actually, you didn't grow in my stomach, right? You grew up in another part, called my uterus. And so you can talk about that. And the other thing about, I think, conversations regarding sex is we tend to think of it more as we're explaining about what puberty is, we're explaining about the mechanics of sex. And while that still is true, I think right now that the topic and the things that we, really should be talking to our kids go well beyond that. And we have to be also thinking about topics that include, consent and harassment and, and gender identity. So it's become a much bigger topic and something that I think is hard to tackle in one sort of quote talk. So I want to leave a little bit of time, but for those of you who really want to kind of plow in or looking for more information than a sort of a 1-hour webinar, these are a few sources that you can go. There's a nice course that is done by one of the, considered one of the national parenting experts at Yale. It's a free course through Coursera. And there's also a couple other programs that I think offer a lot of sort of more sort of videos about communication. They're not free. They're not horribly expensive. I think they generally run about $80 or so, but another area to look at. And here are some other resources, and I think Mariah may have some others to show as well. So I'm going to stop there and welcome your questions and comments.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rettew. This was really great. I really appreciate having you here today. I think I opened the chat so that everyone can share their questions if anyone's got any additional questions for Dr. Rettew. And I really appreciated, as I said, as a parent of teenagers, just really the opportunity to sit and think about how I'll utilize some of this information. Sometimes, like you said, it is, information that we know, but that we just don't sit down and think. And in my day-to-day lives, it's hard to remember that, yes, I need to make sure there's just as much praise as there is kind of criticism or opportunities for them to grow. And, so many great things that you're mentioning today, I really appreciate. And so I have on the screen now some of the same resources that Dr. Rettew does, but I just wanted to mention that ParentIN is another resource in your community, again, for folks, particularly in the Burlington and Champlain Valley school districts. And in the Champlain Valley School District, Amy Sayer, who's on the call again today, kind of seeing some of the same information you are, is there. She works as a substance misuse prevention professional in the schools, and she helps coordinate ParentIN there. So she's an additional resource for parents in that community. And we have some similar folks in our community in Burlington. So feel free to reach out through our websites or our social media pages and connect with us, and we can connect you to other information that you might be looking for today too. We're happy to help. And I listed some other sites on the resource page that we really like and that I use a lot as we're kind of connecting folks to information that's available for them. So thank you to everyone who joined today, and we appreciate the opportunity to do this, and we'll be sharing more events probably during the summer and throughout the next year. So if you can, join our social media pages and we'll post them as they come up, and hopefully at some point we'll be able to do some of these in person again too. So thank you, Dr. Rettew. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thanks for taking part. Good night, everybody.